The year doesn't begin with fireworks for everyone. For some, it begins with a sound that doesn't belong in the silence, with a feeling that crawls up the spine before the clock even finishes striking midnight. As 2026 opens its eyes, there are people who will remember its first days not for celebration, but for fear that wrapped around their chest and refused to let go. Tonight, you're about to step into stories that are true, unsettling, and deeply human. These are not just tales meant to terrify you before sleep. There are moments where ordinary people stood at the edge of something dark and walked away changed. Because horror doesn't only exist to scare us. Sometimes it exists to teach us how to survive, how to listen, how to trust ourselves when the world feels wrong, and how to keep going when hope feels thin. There is a reason fear feels sharper at the beginning of a year. It's because the future is wide open, and the unknown has teeth. We make promises to ourselves, tell ourselves we'll be stronger, wiser, braver. But fear tests those promises early. The stories you're about to hear didn't happen in movies or books. They happened to real people who thought the night would pass quietly. Each one carries a lesson written in sweat, tears, and the kind of silence that follows survival. If you listen closely, you may recognize yourself in them. There is a moment in life that almost everyone has experienced but rarely respects. It's the moment when nothing looks wrong, but everything feels wrong. The air changes. Your heartbeat grows louder. Your body knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Too often, we brush that feeling aside. We tell ourselves we are tired, anxious, traumatic. But fear doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from instincts older than language. One terrifying true story that still circulates among night shift workers began on the second night of January, when a security guard named Elias clocked in for what he thought would be another quiet patrol. The factory he watched had been closed for years, its machines frozen in dust and rust, its hallways echoing like empty lungs. The kind of place where your footsteps sound like someone else following you. Around 2 in the morning, Elias stopped walking. He didn't know why. No alarm had sounded, no door had opened, but his chest tightened so suddenly it stole his breath. The lights above him flickered, and for a split second, the shadows along the walls seemed too deep, too intentional. Every part of him wanted to turn back, to call in and report something he couldn't explain. Instead, he laughed quietly to himself. He told himself it was just the start of a new year. That fear was embarrassing. That grown men didn't get scared of empty buildings. He kept walking. That decision haunted him for years. Minutes later, he noticed something that didn't belong. Footprints in a layer of dust that had not been disturbed since the factory closed. They were fresh. They were leading toward the stairwell where one of the cameras had gone dark. Elias felt the fear come back. Heavier now, sharper. This time he listened. He locked himself in the security office and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the building inch by inch. What they found still makes people go quiet when they hear it. A wanted fugitive had been hiding in the ceiling above the break room, armed, hungry, and desperate enough to do anything not to be caught. The spot where Elias had frozen earlier, laughing off his fear, was directly beneath that ceiling panel. Police later told him that if he had continued his route as planned, if he had ignored that feeling for just a few more minutes, he likely wouldn't have walked out alive. Fear tried to save him. Pride almost killed him. The lesson burned itself into Elias's life. Instincts are not weakness. They are survival speaking in a voice we've been taught to ignore. Horror stories punish characters who don't listen because real life does too. Starting a new year means choosing whether you'll respect that inner warning or silence it again. Courage isn't pretending you're not afraid. Courage is stopping when fear whispers and asking why. Fear grows louder when we are alone. Isolation doesn't just make horror worse, it gives it room to breathe. In the frozen backcountry of Alaska, a woman named Mara learned this lesson on a night she thought would be her last. Her cabin sat miles away from the nearest road, surrounded by trees so thick they swallowed sound. A winter storm had knocked out her power just after sunset, plunging the cabin into a darkness so complete it felt solid. Hours later, she heard footsteps in the snow outside. Slow, deliberate, circling. She locked the door, sat on the floor, with her back against it, and listened as those footsteps returned again and again. The cold crept into her bones, but the fear did something worse. It convinced her she was invisible, that no one would hear her scream, that no one would come. The scariest part wasn't the possibility of someone outside. It was the certainty of being alone. After hours of terror, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it, Mara turned on her old emergency radio. Her voice broke as she called for anyone. Anyone, at all. A stranger answered. A ham radio operator miles away stayed on the line with her until morning, talking, grounding her, reminding her she still existed in the world. When daylight came, there were no footprints, no signs of anyone ever being there. But the fear had been real, and so was the lesson. Silence feeds terror. Connection starves it. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting what scares you. Sometimes it's about refusing to face it alone. In 2026, reach out before fear convinces you that you don't matter. Some places carry memories that don't stay buried. When we refuse to acknowledge the past, it finds its own way to speak. A family who moved into an abandoned farmhouse in Eastern Europe learned this through sleepless nights and whispered voices. Their young daughter began talking to someone she called the quiet man, describing him standing behind the walls, watching. At first, her parents dismissed it as imagination. But the house groaned at night. Cold spots bloomed in hallways. The child began waking with bruises she couldn't explain. Desperate, the parents searched local records. What they found made their blood run cold. During the war, that farmhouse had been used for executions. Dozens of people had died within those walls, forgotten and unspoken of. When the family acknowledged what had happened, when they brought in locals to pray and speak the names of the dead, the activity stopped. Fear lost its grip when truth was allowed in. The past doesn't disappear just because we don't want to face it. Healing begins the moment we stop running. Preparation can mean the difference between panic and survival. Horror stories are full of people caught off guard, unready for what comes next. Real life is no different. On New Year's Eve in New York, during a citywide blackout, a man became trapped in an elevator between floors. The darkness was immediate and absolute. Screams echoed from above and below him. Hours passed, but he survived because he carried a flashlight, water, and a fully charged phone. While others spiraled into terror, he prayed, waited, and endured. Being prepared isn't living in fear. It's respecting reality enough to meet it with calm. Not all monsters announce themselves. Some smile. Some speak softly. Some look normal enough to trust. In 2007, a woman hitchhiking after her car broke down accepted a ride that nearly ended her life. Something felt off from the moment she sat down. The driver avoided eye contact, repeated her words back to her in a strange way, and drove past the turn she pointed out. Fear flooded her body, but instead of freezing, she acted. She pretended to be violently ill, gagging and begging him to pull over. He did. She ran. Later, police linked the driver to multiple assaults. Evil doesn't always look like a nightmare. Awareness is a form of self-love. Faith doesn't erase fear, but it can give you something to hold on to when fear tries to hollow you out. A miner trapped underground after a collapse spent 2 days in darkness, unsure if anyone would reach him in time. He later said the prayers he whispered didn't make the walls open or the air cleaner. They reminded him he wasn't alone in the dark. Hope doesn't always change circumstances. Sometimes it changes how long you can endure them. Survival often requires letting go of what feels safe. A man lost in the desert survived by abandoning his broken car, the one place that felt familiar, and walking toward distant lights he wasn't sure were real. Staying would have killed him. Horror teaches us that clinging to the familiar can be more dangerous than stepping into uncertainty. Growth often begins where comfort ends. Every ending carries the seed of a beginning, even the ones born from fire and loss. On the first day of a new year, a woman watched her home burn to the ground. Everything she owned turned to ash. Standing barefoot in the cold, wrapped in a borrowed coat, she realized something that would stay with her forever. She was still alive. The fear stripped her down to what mattered, and in that emptiness, she found strength she never knew she had. As 2026 begins, remember that fear will walk beside you at times, but it does not own you. These stories exist to remind you that even when the night feels endless, courage still rises, help still reaches out, and hope still breathes quietly in the dark. May this year teach you to listen when something feels wrong, to reach out when silence closes in, to prepare without panic, and to trust that you are stronger than the shadows that test you. May you be guarded when you cannot see the road ahead, guided by wisdom when fear speaks, and held by faith when the world feels too heavy to carry alone.